So I wanted to start off this special video by just quickly mentioning that if you haven't heard by now, I'm actually nominated for a Star Wars Fan Award, which is crazy. And it would mean so much to me if you could vote for my Emphas Nest costume. I will leave the link to where you can vote for it in the top of the description box. You can actually vote once a day until voting closes on November 13th. So it would mean so much if you could take the time to vote. It's just an honor to be nominated and to have gotten that far in the whole process. So without further ado, let's get on to what we are actually here for, customizing this figure. So here is the actual figure. This is actually one of the ones that I used for reference for my costume. And because I have become so familiar with this costume, I'm going to give you a rundown of everything wrong with this figure that I'm going to be ending up changing. The first thing that most of the Emphas Nest figures do have wrong with them, they have the van braces on the wrong arms. Now, the main thing that you can tell because of this is that point. That point should be on the outside of the arm. So I'm going to be cutting these off and flipping arms. The other problem that's wrong with the van braces is they only have 4 blades. The real ones have 5 blades. So I'll be adding a blade to those as well. As far as the front goes, like, the one thing I do love about this figure is it has tons of detail, so I will be able to do a whole lot with that detail and just kind of improve the paint job. But one of the other things I'm going to change is the cape. This is kind of a cheap cape. It's not as full as it should be, and it's also missing the orange lining as well as the stripe on the edge. And because from the costume I have it left over, I'm going to get rid of this plastic fur and actually use the same material I used for my cape. The other thing I will be changing as well, just kind of as a first thing, this particular helmet blade needs to be extended. It's not long enough, which I'm sure was done for packaging because it should be out to about here. But other than that, it's a really great figure, and like I said, lots of sculpted details that I will be able to work off of. I also am probably going to change these tabards to be soft goods, just so they look super awesome. The other thing under these tabards that is completely understandable is the legs have the same sculpts, which would normally be fine, except there's only one knee pad on this costume. So I'll be somehow removing this knee pad. But yeah, that's kind of a rundown of everything that I'm going to do. So let's get straight into actually customizing this figure. So I started off by taking my hot knife and making the changes that I mentioned at the beginning. So removing the fur from the shoulders as well as the cape, and then also the van braces as well as the tablers. Then I started trying to remove the knee pad, and when I was doing this I realized that it was actually completely hollow underneath. The outside knee pad sculpt was the outside of the model basically. So I decided to take some Warbler and kind of fill in the hole, which is what I'm doing here. Yeah, just basically melting the Warbler down with the plastic to create a solid base. I also decided to add the grooves into the backs of the shoes with my hot knife. The front had them on the shoes, but for some reason the back didn't, so I added those. And I also realized that there was this piece on the side of the leg that I forgot to add, so I added that in, although I realized after that I attached it in the wrong spot, so I then later moved that down to where it should have been. And I just made that side leg piece in some Warbler. While I had my hot knife out, I actually decided to do some work on the staff. Although there wasn't much that I had to change on the staff, I decided not to make it longer because when the staff is fully extended, it was a little short compared to the figure. But I actually had to fill in, there was this very strange gap along the side, so I filled that in with some Warbler, and then I just added some burnt in details. So I added more grooves to the sides that they should have had, as well as actually put in the holes into the grate part at the top. The next thing I did was work on the extra blades for the van braces. So I basically just traced one of the actual blades from the original and then made a template from it and then cut those out of Worbla. And to attach those, I pretty much just burnt the two types of plastic together. And similar to how I attached the 5th van brace blade, I also extended the back helmet blade, as well as I decided to extend the height of the upper antenna type looking things and reshape those. And now it's painting time. So I ended up priming all of the pieces with some matte Mod Podge. I just figured that was going to be the easiest thing to kind of prime the whole figure and the props with. So I ended up doing 2 layers of that on the entire figure, which seemed to have worked really well. It's what I have used to customize Funko Pops in the past. Yeah, matte Mod Podge, really easy to get your hands on and works great for priming plastic and different figures. So the one cool thing about making this custom figure is I actually got to use all of the same paints that I used on my actual costume. So it is basically like a miniature version of my costume, which is pretty cool. But I actually just ended up using the tubed craft paint that you can buy at like Michael's, like it's like $2 a bottle, not even sometimes. And yeah, I used that for everything in the various colors that I used for my costume. The helmet is definitely what I spent the most time on paint job wise. I wanted to really use the sculpture that was already there in the figure and just kind of bring that out. So I spent a long time, as you can see, using a much darker paint to get it into the grooves of the helmet so you could bring out the quote that's on the helmet as well as all the different cracks. Another thing that I actually had to spend quite a lot of time on was painting the different details in the suit. The figure, it was all one plastic color, so painting the belts, the cream color and black, as well as the shoes, just a lot of painting of the solid plastic color to get it to be the right color. Like, the detail in the model was definitely there, but the paint job was not. Like, I also even had to paint the different areas of the costume to be the blue, because the suit fabric is actually 2 different fabrics. You have the brown oilskin and then a denim-like fabric around the knees and on the arms. I'm actually really happy with how the van braces turned out. They really do look like miniature versions of mine. So yeah, of course I added the stripes on the appropriate ones because the left and the right stripe colors are reversed. And then I of course added on the silver details to the middle part as well as roughing up the edges of the blades. At this point I was happy with the helmet paint job, so I added the stripes to the helmet blades. I also realized at some point that the helmet actually didn't have the gash across the forehead, so I put that in with my hot knife. Here I'm just adding the top coat of the metallic blue color. I actually underpainted it in a gray and then added the blue silver color. Then I decided to work on some of the lower details, so adding the silver to the buckles of the shoes, as well as painting the wraps that go around the legs. I also did a bit of dry brushing on the rest of the van braces to make them look more like leather. I actually did so much underpainting and detail work on this figure that I could not even begin to film all of it. So here finally I have basically finished everything else, done all of the detail work on the teeth and chest box, and now I am just dirtying up the rest of the suit. And now that she is fully painted, I am finally attaching the van braces back onto the correct arms. Now that all the painting is done, it's time to work on more of the soft goods. So I somewhat crazily decided to wrap the staff in the appropriate areas with some actual leather cording like it actually is wrapped, as well as some of the other cording that is wrapped around mine. And later even I decided to actually add some of the stupidly small beads to the sides and paint those the appropriate colors. Next thing I did was the cape. So my mom actually made me a tiny version basically of the cape using the orange fabric that is in my cape, and then she ended up getting some other wool-like material because the material that my cape was actually done in was way too thick to make a small doll-size version. And then I just cut some very thin strips of the same material on my cape and added those to the side. I actually printed out a small version of the same template I used for my tabblers to construct the tabblers for the action figure. So I used that as a guide for the length and width, and then I cut out the fabric and glued the edges down to stop it from fraying, and glued those into the inside so that it would give the illusion that it was double-sided. Then also using the template, I drew on the lines of the stripes as a guide for painting. And then of course the fun part, actually painting on the stripes. Again, these were literally done the exact same way that my tabblers were made, same paint, same fabric, everything. I also painted the back on the sides just because the actual tabblers are double-sided, so I wanted to give that illusion. And just like my tabblers, I did these in the same order because I needed the paint to dry, because the black you actually kind of fade into the orange-ish stripe. So had to have them in a certain order so that everything could dry enough to give that effect. And just like mine, I ended up dirtying them up with some watered down black paint. Once all the paint was dry, I ended up cutting them to the correct angle, as well as folding and gluing them together. As you can see, I attached the cape as well as the tabblers and the fur around the top of the cape. I actually ended up spraying the figure with a UV protectant spray before I added any of the fabric pieces, just to protect it from dust, sunlight, whatever. You know, I spent a lot of time on that paint job. I wanted to last. And here is the finished customized figure.